it will be a lot easier if people could turn those cameras off at that point. As you should see, there is a facility to ask questions using the chat function, so please use that throughout. It will be monitored, and particularly through the debate and when Katrina and Janet are speaking. We will be monitoring the questions, and we will ask them of those speakers when they come on. Please remain respectful of others. There will be some opinions, no doubt, that not everybody shares, but please allow them the space to say that. If there is any abuse or disrespect, then we will remove you from the event, because we are going to touch on some topics that no doubt people will feel that they want to say a lot. So please be respectful of each other. But ultimately, we're here to remember Stephen, and we're here as a group to talk about things that matter to us. So we want to enjoy the day. So if we move on to the next bit, hopefully we can mute anybody coming in. So if you haven't got yourselves on mute, we're now going to have just a 1 minute of silence and reflection for Lord Macpherson, who passed away this year and is so integral to this work and everything that came from it. And Richard Okorogei, who also passed away, and you will have seen in the news. So we are going to have 1 minute silence, where I'd ask for you just to reflect on that time and many others who we've lost along the way this year. So we'll do that now. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So we're now going to show you a video which has been produced for us by Stuart Lawrence, Stephen's brother. We're very honoured to be able to show this video to you all. So please take the time to listen. I know he would have wanted to have been with us today, but he wasn't able to join us. Nihat, we can't hear that at the minute.
What now?
Hello. Just want to say my name's Stuart Lawrence. I'm the younger brother of Stephen Lawrence, and this is a short message for the National Black Police Association and its members. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for joining us today on Stephen Lawrence Day, and I really appreciate your time. I'm hopeful that the conversations that you'll have today will enable for us all to move forward as we all can manage in this different time that we're living in with COVID, with the different types of reports and contesting of different types of movements at the moment. And I first of all want to say thank you all for your service, because it is a service that not many of us can do, and I understand the pressures that you're all under as well, and I appreciate that. But like I said, it's time for us all to move forward now in a more positive and understanding way. Today is a poignant day for me for many different reasons, but most of all, we want to focus in on the legacy for change that we were trying to see. That can only happen if we all play an active part in that. I also want to say a massive thank you to your president as well, Andy, who I know has just had a new addition to his family, so congratulations for that as well. But he's still giving his time, he's still giving his attention to this, and I really appreciate that. And long may this continue now, this association between the Stephen Lawrence Foundation and the National Black Police Association. Again, I'd like to say thank you, and let's keep on working together.
And I think that's actually a good time for me to bring in Andy George himself, Inspector Andy George, who is the president of the National Black Police Association, who has joined us today. Before we go on to our next speaker, Katrina French, who he's going to introduce. So if I just hand you over to Andy George. Before I do that, can I just remind you, when speakers are speaking, if you could please turn your camera off, just so that the main speaker is highlighted on screen. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. As Stuart had said, I am actually off on paternity leave at the minute, but given the poignant day that it is today, it's important that we do all come together to recognise the legacy that Stephen's murder actually left for policing in general, and again also the trauma that the Lawrences went through. A lot has been said about Stephen Lawrence's murder, but what we must remember is that he was a son and a brother, and the Lawrences, both Doreen and Neville, have fought tirelessly to try to make his death mean something. Stuart is a new reiteration of that now as well, and Stuart is stepping into that space to try and bring young people together and kind of focus more on the positivity and how we can create different outcomes for young people. The Lawrences themselves, as we said, they're synonymous with racial equality in policing, quite rightly too, and Doreen, Neville and the rest of the family have fought, as I said, tirelessly to make sure that things changed. Lord Macpherson, who was recognised in the minute's silence as well, obviously give us a strong foundation, I suppose, to build on to repair some of the damage which Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, officers and staff members have felt and had in the kind of years leading up to Stephen's death and beyond it. That definition of institutional racism that was kind of, for me, that should have been the building block for where we were. The institutional racism isn't something that we should be afraid of. It's our response to that that's kind of key. And the response to that should come from the admission that, yes, we might be. It's not up for policing to decide on that. It's up to us to respond to what the community tell us. We are or should have a focus on policing with the community, and we rely on the community to legitimise the work we do and to make us better at everything we do. So hopefully today's event will help educate those that weren't around when Stephen's death and the Macpherson report come out and keep the legacy going, because it is as relevant today as it was back in 1993 and when the actual report was released in 1999. So hopefully you'll take quite a bit away from it. As we said, the first speaker that we have in relation to this is somebody that the NBPA have worked with for quite a while. Katrina was the CEO of Stopwatch and the chair of MOPAC, Stop and Search Community Monitoring Framework. She has extensive experience in the field of stop and search, which is a topical issue, which is one that comes up quite a bit and one that we will be debating later on today. So I will hand over to Katrina just to kind of give her input, because you'll be hearing a lot more from me later. So Katrina, over to you, and thanks for attending today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just like to say thank you, Andy, for the lovely introduction, and to the whole of the organisers for inviting me on this really poignant and special day. It's quite an honour and a privilege to be discussing something that's incredibly personal to me, but also very professional. So I want to spend the next 20 minutes or so just sharing a bit about my journey, how I came to be in the remit of policing and stop and search, and how the tragic death and senseless death of Stephen, and murder rather, how it inspired me in a way that actually I didn't recognise until not recently, but I suppose I stepped into the field. So 28 years ago, I was not even 10 years old. Nevertheless, I remember that in my family, there was great discussions around the murder and a lot of upset about how the police seemed to not be doing anything about catching the killers. And just a lot of discontent. And I remember thinking as a child, like, why does no one care? Why does no one want to catch the killers? What had Stephen did wrong? I could recall that everyone said he was a studious person, loved by many, articulate, and it just was bamboozled as a child as to how that could happen. Fast forward a few years, and I go off to secondary school, and I think it was in 1999, because I was looking at the timeline for how things happened. And in 1999, it was the Macpherson report. And I was thinking, why did I do that assembly at school? So a few friends and I did an assembly, and it was about Stephen Lawrence and his death, and what we wanted to see is change. And I think it's really important to pick up on what Stuart said, which was about a legacy of change, and that being part of this afternoon, particularly a conversation that speaks about what's gone wrong, but also what can we do better? How can we build better relations? So yeah, I did this assembly, and it was at my secondary school, and it was in Lambeth, a group of my friends, and I think we were all young black girls, about 14 years old, and we spoke with quite a lot of conviction about what was wrong with the system and why we felt it had to be corrected. And because we went to a Catholic girls' school, it was about like forgiveness and repenting and how do we live amongst each other. And I remember afterwards we had a slot in the morning, a slot in the afternoon. It was delivered in the chapel. The teachers said that the morning one went okay, but the afternoon one, they thought there was racial undertones, and we were reprimanded for, I wouldn't say we didn't incite any violence, but basically it was one of those, we discussed and spoke truth to power and were reprimanded about it, just the students. And you see that happening now, and it stayed with me, the fact that it's very difficult to speak about injustice. It's very difficult to bring to life people's pain and want people to be held to account. And how can we bring people on board? So my journey into this policing and stop and search space is one that I didn't ever envisage. I worked in local government after I graduated from university. I'd studied social political science, had an interest in sociology, criminology, and actually wanted to be a barrister. And that was my desire. I did a mini pupillage at Garden Court. And all of these things were leading me into an arena where it was about society, policing, as a black woman, and growing up knowing that there was racial injustice and police weren't being held to account for their actions, feeling like I needed to serve a greater purpose. So after my day job in the council, I was volunteering for a stop and search scrutiny panel in Islington back in 2015. And when I joined that group, I had ideas of stop and search because I had been stopped and searched, but I had no idea about, reasonable grounds, pace, I didn't know the legislation. I just knew what it was like to, I suppose, be on the receiving end of it, and what was said in the news. So soon after joining the group, I ended up chairing that group, and I took the position very seriously, despite it not being paid. I attended Islington Police Station twice a month to look at body-worn video and to scrutinise the records, the 5090 forms. I also brought along other people, so it wasn't just me. I built the group up, bringing in students, parents, a range of people. So the group was quite vibrant. And then I went off to City Hall as a chair, and saw that there was a network of other chairs, and learnt from people like, you might be familiar with, Ken Hines, Councillor Mohammed Hashi, Temi Mwale, Sandra from Forest, or Roy Costell from Brent, just a range of different people who were much more knowledgeable than myself, incredibly committed, and I learned a lot from them. And I took that back to my Islington group and started to develop it. The position came up as a chair for the MOPAC, and Councillor Hashi, he wasn't a councillor at the time, he said, "Oh, Kat, you should consider it." So I put my hat in the ring, and I ended up becoming the chair for the MOPAC group. And I think it's important that I mention that, because what I want to speak about today is about how we can increase accountability and support you in your job. It's not easy being a police officer. I can imagine it's not easy. It's not easy being black. It's not easy being a police officer. You compound both of those things. You're in an incredibly difficult situation. So I should have really caveated it, and I shouldn't have to, but I'm not anti-police. The organisations I've worked for and the one that I run now, which I'll come on to, we're not anti-police, we're anti-bad policing. And we really want to ensure that people feel they served and they're protected. They are actually served and protected by a public institution. And that when you're a police officer, it's a great honour. And with great honour comes great responsibility. So everything that I've done, whilst you may see me in the media and I may come across quite fierce and critical, it comes from all great intentions about building, I suppose, building a better community and bringing everybody together. So during my time on the scrutiny panels, I invited Stopwatch, who you may know, the national organisation that looks at stop and search, to train the group, because, as I said, I didn't know what I was doing. I'm not afraid to say I don't know something. And I was really keen that we bring some external people in to not just show us about disproportionality, sort of questions we should be asking, but to let the police know that we were serious and that we were, you know, even though we were just volunteers, we were taking this role seriously, and we understood the impact that disproportionate policing has on communities. So Stopwatch came, they did this really good session, and I remember, and this is, I suppose, as my granny would say, you know, be careful what you wish for, you know, your mouth is a strong thing. You should watch what you say, because I said in my head, I wish I worked for them, because it was just sublime what they were doing, and it just chimed so well with my interest. So lo and behold, a few years later, they were recruiting for a chief exec, and I was contacted, and for a rigorous recruitment process was selected, and I had the honour and privilege of leading Stopwatch from 2018 until last December. And in that time, not only did the organisation grow in terms of staffing, we were very successful in injecting into the narrative the harms that were being caused by policing and developing an evidence base. So published reports such as The Colour of Injustice, did research on the gangs matrix, looked at mobile phone extraction, and how what seems like quite innocuous incidences were actually quite impactful for people being stopped. And often, because for the police, it's a stop and search is a tactic, and you may not realise you're using that tactic a lot, or maybe not using it in the way it should be used because you just have it. For the people on the other end, it's a power, and they felt it was being overused, misused, abused. So really championing the voice of those impacted and marginalised, but also having pragmatic solutions to what needs to happen next. How do we move forward? So I'm really proud that we advocated and were able to, although with very little success, go into Downing Street, which the organisation hadn't done before, and speak to different special advisors. And if you know anything about special advisors after recent events in current government, you'll know that they do have some influence, or quite a lot, depending on your name, and speak about and bring in young people and also our volunteers who were working on the projects to speak about what was going on. So the whole premise of, I suppose, what I'm trying to share is my journey into this space was about giving up my free time as a graduate with an interest in sociology, as a person that had been stopped and searched, but also, I should caveat, as a person who has had positive experiences with the police. Not all of them, but I have had them. So wanting to marry all of that together and ensure that we have a better police service. And what I found, to be honest, is quite saddening, because coming back to Stephen and what's happened over the last nearly 30 years is that the racial disparities in stop and search have increased. Stop and search was meant to bring in improved trust and confidence because of the damaged relationships between the police and Black people. And I will speak about Black people specifically, but I understand that Gypsy traveller groups are impacted by disproportionate policing, as are Asian groups and Muslim groups and mixed groups. But I'm going to not speak exclusively, but kind of talk to the Black African and Caribbean experience. And seeing that is quite disheartening, because whilst we want the legacy of change, we've seen that the system is in many ways reluctant to change. And being on the inside as yourselves, I think it's really important that there's spaces such as the NBPA, the National Black Police Association, for you to feel like you can safely discuss how you can bring change inside, because I think it needs to be a two-pronged approach of people like me who run and lead civil society organisations, and then how I can support and people like yourselves who sometimes, because you're in it, can't necessarily speak out in the ways that you want because you are fair of reprimand. Like, let's not try and dress it up. There is usually backlash when you try and go against the system. So thinking about what as an organisation or as a group you guys could do, I think I wanted to touch on some really positive things. So speaking truth to power, you're in incredibly privileged positions. You get to be Black people of colour who when you take off your uniform, no one would necessarily know you're a police officer. So just are likely to be on the other end of policing just as much as people like myself. But equally, you're in those positions knowing and understanding your colleagues and the cultures and the systems that you have to work in, and hopefully working bilaterally, universally with other colleagues and like-minded people to think about how you can ensure that your workplace, a public institution, is not only just works for you, makes you feel comfortable and feels like you can progress, but does what it's meant to do, which is serve and protect, and do so with legitimacy and integrity and transparency. And that's, for me, a call to you guys. You took an oath when you became police officers, and it, on a daily basis, when you're encountering really awful people, which I'm sure there are many in the public, you can become really jaded. I just implore you to really remind yourselves why you did that, and then think of Stephen Lawrence, like when we didn't have the right police officers looking at that case, how long it took to get injustice, and what happens when we don't have justice is the system starts to, it continues to fail, and people have the breakdowns of trust that we see. Also, to encourage you to climb the ranks. It's really important. I want to just commend Janet, big up yourself on your recent honours. You know, no doubt you didn't, when you entered the force, imagine that that's where you would go, but when you serve and you do so with great integrity, it doesn't go unnoticed. So I implore you guys, if we want to talk about systemic change, you have to be in the positions to make them. So if there is that inspectorate, that superintendent role, I don't know, forgive me, the ranks, there's nothing stopping you from doing it. If you see your colleagues doing a not so great job, what stops you from thinking you can't do a job that's better? And this is not about competition, it's about collaboration and always excelling. And it's not excelling to supersede somebody else, it's excelling to do better for ourselves. So I'd encourage you to climb the ranks, nurture and support others. I'm just probably telling you how to suck eggs, but I think hearing it from someone who, often I see the police as a divisive place in terms of coming to stop and search. We never agree on very many stuff, unfortunately. Very few do. Is that internally it's really important, if you want a culture of change, is that you support each other and nurture one another, to have that voice, because it can be lonely and tiring fighting institutional racism, least of all if it's what you're working in and it pays your mortgage. So be allies to each other, and also to your white colleagues that are, you know, being part of the change, but encountering those same obstacles. Be mindful of them coming to this journey in a different way. And I wouldn't say patient, but understanding that, yeah, everyone's on their journey, and it's really good to be able to support and nurture people. And then I think it's incumbent to say you have to whistleblow. If you see your colleagues doing stuff wrong, evil persists because good people do nothing. We've seen that in the case of George Floyd recently, and more closer to home, like the case of Kevin Clark. There's a lot to be learned about restraint use. We've seen it in the years gone by with, you know, people like Joy Gardner. So it's not new, but equally it's still saddening, and I think it makes it even more pertinent why it needs to be fixed. So evil persists because good people do nothing, and you should be calling it out. And that's why Nelson Mandela came, and that's what I think really gave the rocket fuel to the Lawrence campaign, was someone of his caliber recognizing that an injustice here in London is an injustice here is an injustice everywhere. So it's incumbent on you to do that. Speaking about some of the policy things, I think about stop and search and the legacy of Macpherson specifically, there were 3 recommendations, and they were centered around recording, so making sure that all stops were recorded. We know that today they're not. We don't have vehicle stops recorded. Whilst there are several pilots happening around the country, we should have vehicle stops recorded. And it's disappointing and disheartening that here we are 21, 22 years on from Macpherson, and that hasn't been implemented. And it's quite a easy thing to do. We know that vehicle stops, people report that their vehicle stops are more likely to be Black and Asian ethnic minority people. So it's incumbent that encounter is being captured. Black whilst driving, Gypsy whilst driving, it's a real thing. And we see officers being stopped as well off duty. So it's incumbent that if we want to keep the legacy alive and have active citizenship and trust, that the recommendations be implemented. Secondly, we have to be cautious of how technology is changing stop and search encounters, and the over-reliance on data and harvesting, and how, for me, that is an intrusion on people's privacy. It's an intrusion on human rights, and it undermines civil liberties, and also causes problems for you guys, women and men, they, them, and they, anyone who identifies in any other way, carrying out their roles. Because if you can't give someone a slip, that accountability on the spot is gone. It's eroded. If you're telling them to go to a police station where they already don't trust the police, it shouldn't be. The onus of that encounter shouldn't be on the person, especially if it was a no further action, to have to go to the police station and give their details to get that information. It feels nonsensical, and it feels like the system once again is finding ways to impede transparency, impede people from feeling like they can contribute. So I would really say to people, really challenge the need or why we're not recording in the ways that we do. Although we're collecting much more information, don't get me wrong, and all these dashboards are in some ways really great for analysis. I want to think about the person on the street. They don't want to have to go to a police station and get their piece of paper, and they don't necessarily just want a slip. They want a real understanding of the grounds they were stopped at, especially because they know there's disproportionality in that. So if we want their respect, if we want their trust, if we want the legitimacy of the office, it's incumbent that we have structures and policies in place that enable you to do your jobs properly. And I'm really sorry that I don't think that they are in place to enable you to do your job at the fullest, and for communities to feel that when they are engaging with the police in these particular circumstances. I only speak to stop and search because it's that cold face of innocent people, sometimes 75% of the time NFAs, engaging with the police, and how that feels on their behalf. And then I'm conscious of time, so I just want to touch on what I do. So I've spoken about what's important to me, the journey. You'll know about Stopwatch. So I left Stopwatch in December. Last year was an incredibly insightful year in so many ways, personally and professionally. I led a fundraising campaign and raised an unprecedented amount for the organisation. We had started to carry out our strategy, and it felt like a time to move on, but never one to want to leave the dance. I was keen to stay in the field, and decided that I would set up a new social enterprise called Unjust. You'll see the tagline. I'll just move a bit so you can see. Oh, this took me 3 days to do. I'm so proud of it. So excuse me if you come to any other meetings and you see me doing this sideward shuffle to show off my logo. But basically, I wanted to stay in policing, and I wanted to create an entity that was inclusive and worked around collaboration. And when I say that, the whole aspect was about challenging disproportionate policing practices and policies. I don't know much about the rest of the criminal justice system, but I have read the Lammy report, and I've read the Angelini, and I've read other reports. So I'm conscious that in those other bits of the system, there's problems. And I'd really be keen to work with partners in those spaces and share my knowledge of policing and how we can, I say diversion, but I don't even like the word diversion, because some people were never going into the police system in the first place. We need to find other language and not, anyway, I digress. But the whole point I set up this organisation is I'm on a mission to address structural discrimination, and I want to create equity within society. I want people that have not traditionally been impacted by policing, people like the Sarah Everard vigilists who went there regardless of what you may think about it, and had an experience of policing that they hadn't. Recent people who've been protesting, like XR people, climate protesters, who have, and I suppose in some ways it goes back to, if we're being political, like the 70s and 80s, where you had the miners' strikes and the kind of face off of the trade unions. Policing has always been a sensitive issue, and it's in many ways always had people that it's had to control more than others. And my whole point about that control is that it needs to be proportionate, it needs to be fair, it needs to be accountable, and it needs to be effective. So if you are going to put measures in, whether you call it legislation, rules, orders, whatever, it's all semantics, you need to make sure that there's regulation around how that's being implemented. So Unjust understands to achieve this change, and it's a system transformation. Yes, we should care about bad apples, but it's about the root of the tree, not just the branches, is that we need to empower everybody, especially those adversely impacted. But also, I want to build on the momentum of last year and the Black Lives Matter stuff, because I truly believe that people came out and they supported, but that energy has not dissipated, but it's had nowhere to go. It's a bit like if you cook oxtail and then like you've got it in a pressure cooker, a little bit of steam came out, but you're not quite ready yet. You're like, oh God. And then I feel at some point the steam's going to come out, and rather than it explode, I really want to make sure that, and when I say non-impacted, I just speak frankly, white middle class people, because working class white people are impacted by police. And this is about race. It's also about class. But just as a Black person, you can't finance your way out of racism. So you will be stopped if you're in a nice car. So there's lots of it overlaps here. And I strongly believe that we need to take a much more, I say, community public safety approach and reimagine what that means for everybody, as opposed to when I heard always community policing, because if you're not in a community where you see police, in a affluent one, you'll think this is nothing to do with you. Whereas for me, it is everything to do with you. Because the police are really trying to control that area because they don't want it spilling into yours. They don't want people coming to fever in your area. So if we keep people in Hackney in there and policing that way, we have this perception of places which are nice and places which aren't. So I really want to smash that idea into injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. And how can I be an active ally, even if I'm white, cis, woman, not whatever, LGBT and all of these other interlays? I don't think this is a Black problem, it's a societal problem. So we've got a couple of issues of focus: stop and search, use of force, mental health and policing technology and data harms, because I'm very concerned at how technology is coming into these street encounters and innocent people are being asked to give more and more information, like fingerprints and facial recognition when you've not been arrested. The whole point of PACE was to not pull you into the criminal justice system, yet on the street you're being treated like a criminal and being asked to give fingerprints. And then looking at services that empower professionals, parents and young people. So I'm in the process of developing a range of different programs. I don't want to say it's training because I think it's overrated to call something training, but more workshops and seminars that aim to stimulate and provoke some thinking around this stuff and get different people in the room. And not just young people. I think adults have a big role to play, professionals that are working, as well as parents who are raising children in the sort of society we're trying to create. And then the final bit is around legal redress, people getting in touch saying I've been arrested for an obstruction charge, and what can I do? So having a referral system, or I've been injured by the police, what can I do? Or detained and I don't think it was lawful, having a referral system to put them in touch with the relevant people. So that's what I'm doing now. I haven't got a website at the moment, it's under construction, but I am on LinkedIn, Katrina French, and it's spelled with 2 F's. I'd really like to say thank you. I know I've spoken a bit longer than I anticipated, and I am able to stay for questions, and I've changed my diary around a bit, but it's been such an absolute honour and pleasure to share with you what I've been doing. And I bring it back to Stephen before I close. I wouldn't probably be doing this if it hadn't been for his death, which is beautiful, but actually quite painful. And I hope in saying that is one of the positives in having a day that recognises his legacy, is that people like me, who were not even a decade old when he died, have stepped into quite intimidating spaces and not, I wouldn't say come into battle, but come in to do good, and really want to support police officers who every day, especially Black officers, put their lives on the line for us in a society which doesn't always treat us right. So regardless of what differences we may have on screen around stop and search, I really do appreciate the service you give to me and to wider society, and I'd like to say thank you ever so much. That's it.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Some very, very powerful messages there from a lot of people, and a couple of questions that have popped up, which I'll pose to you now, if that's okay. Some of them you did actually go on to answer through your talking there, but the first one, and just at this stage, if people do want to turn their cameras on to ask the question themselves, then feel free to do. It's nice to see some faces. I would ask just if you could keep yourself on mute until you are speaking though, just to assist with the quality of sound. So we've got a question here from 1661. Adam, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Katrina. Thank you for that. It was really good, really well worded. It was like you're in my brain a little bit as well. My question is, do you think, we obviously are aware that there's a systemic problem, but do you think it's worse in certain areas within the 4 nations, or do you think it's a force issue, or do you think it just is a general issue across the board?
Okay, so empirically, we'll say there's worse in some places. So while the Met does more, actually the racial disparity is quite low in compared to Dorset. But I think you start comparing apple and pears. This is a societal problem. And if you have an organisation such as the Met, which is one of the most leading police forces in the world, doing something and not being challenged, that ripples down. It's like having an older sibling. So it's like you have to bend the right one. It doesn't mean it always works, but it sets the example. So I think the Met has a big role to play also in, coming back to Stephen, its approach to how it handles crime. We've seen the recent disappearance of Richard, and he reflected in 1 minute silence is people are being treated because they're coloured differently, regardless of whether the state wants to acknowledge it. And the issue isn't whether it's because we've got 5 people in the village or 500 people in the village. I think it comes down to the structures, the lack of regulation. And also, I think for people that are carrying out stop and search, like police officers, when they see maybe colleagues not doing things in the way they do, I don't know what mechanisms or spaces there are for that internal challenge that doesn't always go to a disciplinary. So I'm not one of those throw the book at everybody. I think there needs to be, and it's not a grey area, but a softer space for people to have those conversations and put you on a warning before we start throwing the book at people, because all that does is cause resentment and it doesn't necessarily create change. So yes, I think it's a societal problem. I think the Met has particular issues, but I think that it's across the nation. And as we've seen with George Floyd, it's actually international. So I think it supersedes forces. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Adam. So moving on, we have another question here from Debbie. She's just asking about compulsory use of body-worn video during stop and search. I don't know whether Debbie wants to pop on. I think we all agree, and particularly with the George Floyd case, how important that footage was around there. So I don't know, Debbie, do you want to come on and ask your question?
Yeah, I won't be able to pop my camera on because I'm having a few tech issues at the moment, but Katrina, I just wondered what your thoughts were around the use of body-worn video when it comes to stop search in particular, and whether or not you think that would assist with transparency and accountability, and perhaps indirectly assist with the proportionality of stop searches.
Okay, I think so 2 things. It's definitely a step forward in terms of transparency, because if you don't see it, we get into he said, she said. So everybody knows it's always good to see what happened. I think that we can't over rely on it. So it's not a panacea. So just going back to Rodney King in the early 90s, he was abused I think it was in a gas station or somewhere by the police. Still, there was no justice. So there's still a gap between seeing what you see and, as you guys know, working within the law, the criminal justice system, and whether that translates into a charge and let alone a conviction. In regards to having it, when I was the chair of the stop and search panel, we were looking at it and reviewing the data. Some of the things I didn't like was that you had to do a dip sample. And I feel that you should, if you've got the empirical, like the stop slips, the 50/90s, and you're going through them and someone had wrote like really few lines, I would say I want to see that because he's only written 3 lines. It doesn't make sense. Can I see this? Can I see the record? No, like, oh no, you can't do it that way. And I thought it was disingenuous, because if you wanted meaningful scrutiny, you'd look at some written stuff and then just say, okay, I want to see how you behaved. That gives me a good look of, are you writing and doing what you're saying? And I found that they were blocking our ability to scrutinize in a methodical way. So it can be used for good, not good. It has useful purposes, but I think it's being over relied on. The other point I want to make is the public don't know that they only have, is it 31 days or 28 days to have a look at it. So just as it's useful for officers, there needs to be, and I think that was another recommendation about a public campaign around stop and search. I haven't seen a national campaign around body-worn video being used for stop and search. It's mainly when it was introduced about domestic violence, and I get that, encouraging people who had been abused to capture that on evidence in case they recanted later. But the same campaign hasn't gone into people feeling, if you've not been treated fairly, come and let's have a look at your body-worn video. Let's have that sort of restorative justice campaign. And it's not to attack police officers, but if you're going to use a power, be prepared to be held to account for how you used it. It is a power. It's not just a tactic. It runs deep. So body-worn video has a role to play. I am concerned also, just as you guys, it's a bit technical, but I'll speak about it, is with procurement, that as you get more savvy cameras, will facial technology be built in? So when you're talking to me, I have no say whether I give you my name, but you've got my face anyway. So there's a whole issue around how we use technology, and why it's really important that it's evidence-based, and that there's analysis of it, and that there's risk committees and ethic committees that aren't just full of police officers, but there's lawyers in there, there's practitioners who can look at things outside of a law enforcement lens, because everyone likes a new toy, but sometimes when you're dealing with lives and liberty, it can have really detrimental impacts. And if you are going to use body-worn video, we should be not just reviewing it and saying, oh, you should have done this and done that. We should actually be looking at what's being said, because in America, they've had empirical studies, and forgive me, I don't know the names, but I'm sure you can look them up, where they've looked at the qualitative words being used. So officers speaking to white people they've stopped use better words like good afternoon, sir, or ma'am, and were much more conciliatory or helpful. And when they were stopping, I'll say people of color, because that's the term in the States, they were more derogatory and less favorable. So if we are going to have that technology, let's use it and analyze how it's being used. Let's not just have it for sensationalism, and that works both ways, for it to be shared on Facebook or anything else like that. But let's look at it and analyze it and make sure that we're using it in the right way. I hope that answers your question. A bit long-winded.
No, it wasn't long-winded at all, and thank you. And I'm really intrigued by what you said right at the end about that use of different linguistic styles when you're speaking. It's so important, isn't it? Language is so important in starting off that communication in the right way. So thank you, Katrina. Thanks very much.
I think it was Debbie. Thank you. And I think exactly speaks to language. Energy doesn't lie. So if your energy is off, people read it. And then if the words you say back the energy that's off, as a police officer, you're already fighting a very difficult battle, and things can, I suppose, escalate very quickly. And if you've got unconscious, or you think it's appropriate because they look like they're 18 to be like, what you like, bruv? We're not friends. And as much as you're being jovial and trying to be nice, the person might actually think you're being patronizing. So it's a difficult dance to have. But I think having that analysis and speaking to people about how they want to be spoken to goes a long way to ensure that you have trust and confidence, and that your jobs are done with the least resistance possible.
Thank you very much. We've had a few comments from Della. I think it's a lot of what you've said has resonated. I don't know whether you want to come on. They've made an interesting point about emotional intelligence and stereotyping. Would you like to come on and highlight what you were saying?
Sorry, yeah, just unmuting myself. Sorry about that. Yeah, I work in intelligence, so it makes a bit of sense. But everything I've heard so far, yeah, it mystifies me. I do the job. I've been there. We've all been there, and some of us haven't been there, so you don't really know. But that doesn't mean that what Katrina is saying is so powerful. The intelligence is already inbuilt for me. It's already there. So, people have got those stereotypes, people have got those unconscious biases, and I go through it on a football pitch. Why should I have to go through it on a football pitch? Why should I have to go and see it in a Twitter feed or a Facebook? It's just there. It's always going to be there. So how do we change it? That is the biggest thing. How do we change it? And I don't know. I haven't got the answers, but can someone get the answers? Yes, we can. The information is there. It's all to see, plain for everybody to see. Not just us in this group chat or other meetings that you have. We have got the information. Nobody takes grip of it. Sorry, I'm getting a bit passionate about it, but nobody takes grip of it. That's the way it is. And we just have to keep on plugging away. And people like Katrina, they need to come at the forefront, and they need to keep on saying things. Why? Because there's injustice out there. There's injustice all the time, and we're just not gripping it. All over, we're just not gripping it. But,
well, I think I you know, it's overwhelming, and that's the sense of it.
Yeah.
And it does become like that. My grandparents, God bless them, said, you know, you don't really gonna make a change. This country's been like this since we come. And I was like, and if you go back into the root of where this division comes from, which is around racial discrimination and 400 years of there not being equity, and I think that leads me on to how do we create that change? Is you need to understand. I think all of us is we're running. For me, this is how I do it. I'm running a race. And I've got the baton and I'm running my leg. I might not see the finish line, but I've contributed to the leg that I had to run, and that you nurture the people behind you, that you pass it on, because fighting racism is tiring and it's costly. So you do what you do and you do it to the best, and you leave the rest for everybody else, because no woman or man is an island. So I really don't. Today is an uplifting day. As much as I've kind of been a bit, I hope you see, not down, but the injustice is there. What are you going to do about it? The time's going to pass. What are you going to do about it? What you're doing about it is serving every day. And it just means chinking away and having those moments of feeling it's all too much, but also recognizing that you're part of the change. You may not feel it or see it, but you are. So I just want to say to that person, I feel it a lot, because I come into rooms and I'm having to say the same thing again and again. And I feel like I'm on the magic roundabout doodle. But if I wasn't, what would I be doing? So yeah, take heart in that. We're doing it in memory of people like Stephen Lawrence, Joy Gardner, Brian Douglas, people that have gone, you know, people in Northern Ireland who were not respected by the police in the Troubles. The injustice is everywhere, and it's not black, white injustice, it's humanity. So we cannot stay silent with it. So yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And an interesting point has been raised just around unconscious bias training. Well, unconscious bias, I'm guessing it's the training they're talking about. I think that is a subject which has had much debate. It's been mentioned in the by ministerial statement. Different forces across the country do different things. What is your view? The view here from Judy. Judy, do you want to come on and just give your viewpoint?
Yeah, hello there, Katrina and everyone. A wonderful presentation. I just like, my camera's not working, so I'm not going to put it on. I'd just like to say, in my force, I think the unconscious bias is a complete waste of time. It's just an NCAL process where everybody clicks, get to the end, and hopefully it's registered on their record. How do you think we can improve unconscious bias? Do you think we should have that as a classroom event? We should have external speakers come in and talk about, you know, stop and search. What's your viewpoint on that? Yeah, so
that the strap line for what I do is right and wrong and creating equity. So the right and wrong bit is that, like, redress, legal, passing people on, and the creating equity bit is the services that I'm in the process of developing. And I think that it has to be taken, for me, this unconscious bias is toxic. It doesn't do what it's meant to be do. So I don't think that we need to put things in these sorts of labels. I think there needs to be candid conversations about different issues. So if we're talking about gender violence, then you'll have themes around racism in that, or discrimination in that. I think when you try and pigeonhole things in how they are, people switch off very easily. So it should be a golden thread in everything that's being done, as opposed to a freestanding item. And because, as you said, it becomes routine. Whereas when you're talking to people, these things for me can't be done over Zoom. They cannot be done over a click like that. There are some things that you need to get into a room. You need to feel the energy. You can't just hide behind your screen and just decide when you don't like the fact I've said racism too many times, you're just going to turn off and go and have a cup of tea and I will never know you were never in there. It needs to be personal. And that's not to be up in your face. It's for people to feel stuff. That's how we are. And I come back and it sounds really rudimental. We're human beings. So this idea that you just go and do something and get a tick box after it doesn't work. And the services that I'm creating are aimed at professionals like yourselves, looking at how we can come into police forces and look at egregious issues, whether that's around use of force, stop and search, and different teams, and have conversations around disproportionality, around perception, around bias. And I don't want it to say conscious or unconscious, because I know what my issues are. I know what my hang-ups were. I know what work I needed to have done. But I think what the part of the problem is people expect you not to come to work with those. So it's meant to be a sterile place when really it isn't. No, it's the place where actually it all comes to the front. So I think we need to forget of how workplaces, it is work, but equally it's you have to address very personal issues in work. And I think there needs to be enclaves which address policing matters, but equally understand the wider implications those have on people's identity and well-being. So race equality networks are essential, spaces like this, but there needs to be rigorous training led by people that are, and I would say anti-racist, but about inclusion, about equity, and are not afraid of uncomfortable conversations, but also there needs to be leadership and there needs to be money in the budget to do this. And it cannot be political. We just do it because we have to be seen. I think that's what's been lacking, is a lack of leadership and a real lack of heart. So it's incumbent for you guys to do an internal call for not just better training, but a flipping of what training means around issues around racial equality, and to really run with that agenda. It's our agenda, and make sure that every issue about things you're doing around use of force, if it's gender, if it's children and children being managed in custody suites, that there's an issue around race in there, because I think it gets missed. And that's where the conversation should be happening naturally, not between 10 and 3 for an afternoon and then you don't do it for 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting debate, and conscious bias as a product. I think you're right in what you say. As a standalone product, it doesn't work. It needs to be part of wider things. And I know, Andy, you've spoken a lot about unconscious bias training. I don't know if you want to come in at this point around that subject.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, like, Katrina's hitting the nail on the head. You know, as I said, this, 2 hours of unconscious bias training standalone is never going to overcome racism, isn't going to come over the psychological processes that produce it. And the thing that we all have to recognise is there is a psychological element to racism, as well as any other bias. It's just like a Man United supporter isn't going to like anything about Liverpool. It's the exact same thought process around that. That's an easier one for most people, or the majority, to understand. And again, my own kind of experiences, I suppose, I come from the majority background. From a community background, I'm a Protestant in Northern Ireland. I was one of the 93% of police officers when I first joined policing. And again, my bias was there. Obviously not from an ethnic minority. I was one of the only people from an ethnic minority in 13,500. Northern Ireland isn't the most diverse place, but all of my unconscious bias were there and clear to see. You know, I come into policing having relatives, fathers and uncles who were police officers who knew. I was able to tap into those resources. I was able to understand what policing was, and I was able to have a certain viewpoint about what policing really did. I suppose I had a lot of thoughts around the police just being there to save the day, and the bravery that they kind of I suppose epitomised during the Troubles. They saved many people, they got many awards, but at the same time then, once that diversity piece happened in Northern Ireland and we got more Catholic officers in from a completely opposing viewpoint, the diversity training that I got wasn't in our 2-hour training session that we got in our training centre. It was that 8-hour shift, 10-hour shift, day in, day out, with people from different backgrounds that were able to share their lived experience with me and open my eyes up to a different viewpoint. That's the first bit. For me, it's about admitting that it's there. The whole label around institutional racism, and then the kind of the loathsome kind of the fact that police are loath to admit that it's there, that's what's stymieing our progress. We have to admit that a problem exists before we can put anything into place to overcome it. As I said, I do hypnotherapy, I do psychological training outside of the police as well, and in the armed response unit had to do a lot of negotiating, but it was all about trying to get other people to see things from a different kind of viewpoint other than their own, and they open their eyes up to that possibility that there was a different kind of perspective than their own. So for me, it's make it part of the initial training, make it part of the armed response training, personal safety program training, our detective training, have it incorporated across the board so that diversity and inclusion isn't just seen as an HR standalone issue. It's something that it makes us better operationally at what we do, and that's the key thing. It's about operational effectiveness, and that's a bit that's lost all the time in policing. So I do support unconscious bias, but not as a standalone product, but as part of a wider package, which is incorporated into every single thing that we do in policing.
Absolutely, and I think there's probably a lot of people who are agreeing very much with what you've said, and I'm keen not to explore too much around stop and search, because we've got the upcoming debate where I think there'll be a lot of thoughts from some of our audience around it. Katrina, I know you probably will have to go at some point, sadly for us, because we could have had you here all day speaking. Is there any final points you want to leave us with before you go on to probably another event?
Yeah, I do, and I try not to do back-to-back Zoom. I try and give myself 10 minutes because it's like zoomed out. But the jobs that you do can be incredibly rewarding, but I like with anything incredibly difficult. And to remember that yes, it's a vocation and it's a job, and when we serve, the people that we're serving really can't stop being black. You only stop being young when you get old. You know, some of the things are kind of at the moment fixed because we're changing. We're gender fluid society, so you know maybe we are going to be post-racial soon. But when you decide to put on your uniform in a day, do so obviously with the integrity of the office, but also the understanding that the people that you stop are just people going about their daily business, especially in a stop and search and encounter, who often are not actually who you thought they were, doing the things that you thought they were doing statistically. And if you've been in any sort of incident where you're traumatized, whether that's a personal incident or work incident, and trauma doesn't just happen because you stop someone and they punch you, it can happen with anything. Please seek some advice, because we transfer and project stuff in all sorts of ways. And I don't care, and it's not me saying police officers are soft or hard, but I understand that things that happen in your life, that it's not one, we are human. So seek help for that, because sometimes it manifests in the slightest of ways, and we find ourselves doing things that we wouldn't usually do, or misusing our powers, or just over relying on stuff because of other things. So you need to be supported, and if you need support in your jobs, please go and get those, because you have really important roles to play in society. And it heavy is the head that wears the crown, but wear it with a great lot of pride and do your jobs with pride. And I really thank you for inviting me into your space, for listening to the work. I'm in the process of developing some programs, and it would be really good once I'm up and going. One of the things I want to develop is a small advisory board of police officers that when I have things I want to discuss, I can go to, because I think part of it is I'm so sick of not having anyone in the police force, and this is not like Janet or Andy, there's people I know, but not having enough of a pool of police officers that want to support civil society organisations, bring the challenge from outside. It can all be anonymous, but it would just be really nice to have a soundboard. So look out, because I think I'll be doing I'll probably go by the National Black Police Association for just a call out for about 10 individuals to support the work. And it's very light touch, but that equity can only be built with a transference of knowledge. And you guys are incredible, ladies, guys are incredibly knowledgeable. So I want my organisation, I say mine, the organisation, to serve everybody. And I think you'd be a great fit with what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I do have a point of contact. I'll put my email I'll put it in the chat before I go, and I give permission for it to be shared amongst everyone else. That's it from me. I'd really like to say thank you. It's been such a pleasure. And I think Stephen Lawrence is very proud of all the work you're doing and the work I'm doing too, and how it's brought us together.
Katrina, can I just ask, Colby has asked a question. Am I able to say something from a community perspective? So it'd be really interesting to hear what Colby has got to say. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I look terrible at the moment. I'm actually the chair of, Colby Peacock. I'm actually the chair of the Strategic Independent Advisory Group for Cleveland Police. Okay. So I'm coming from a different perspective from you guys. And it was really interesting listening to the officers talking about the training, and you also, Katrina, talking about the lack of funding for that training and things. And it really saddens me as a community member that something that's really required is being underfunded. And I think that's where we also, certainly I want to, when I'm going to go back to my meetings and I'm going to be talking to my chief constable, I'm going to be saying, where's the money? Is there the money for this training? And I want to know more about this training. What are you actually, what is this training, entailing and things? We, as Cleveland Police, people have said things about it in terms of, we're not diverse enough, and that we're not representative. But as a community, I will say we're doing our best in terms of as a force. We are trying our hardest to get those figures up in terms of getting more diversity. But I don't know if there's a mistrust in terms of police and things like that, where people are not wanting to join. But the force and, the SIAG as well, we've put forward a really great drive, and we've managed to get more people involved, but still not what I would like, I will say. But it's really, I do want the officers out there to know that, and I don't think they always do know, that you do have a SIAG. And that was something that came from the Macpherson report, and that was something that's come, because of Stephen Lawrence. And like yourself, Katrina, I remember what was happening. I was a year older than Stephen when he lost his life. My brother's the same age. He's now got 4 beautiful children. And I wrote a statement that's gone out today saying that, what could have Stephen's life been today? He wanted to be an architect and things like that. And it is about celebrating his life. And the fact is that he has left us with a great legacy. And it is about celebrating that as well. But we do have more to do. And what I would urge the officers on here to do is get well and truly involved with your SIAG and your IAGs as well, because you've got people there who are part of the community who really, really want to help you. They really want to help you as black officers. They certainly do. And you have got their support. Lean on them and go and talk to them. And yeah, that's literally what I want to say. But thank you so much. Thank you, Katrina. It was really good listening to you.
Oh, no, thank you. Having come through the kind of same route as you, as being in the community and wanting to give back, I think it is important to ask for funding for independent groups, just to have some knowledge base. Why will you set up? What things can we do? How do we scrutinize? How do we support effectively? What's worked in other places? Because people are already giving up their time. A little can go a long way, as my nan used to say. So it doesn't have to be bundles. But I think equally, if you're a community, especially for people they're not hard to reach if you want to nick them, trust me, but they're hard to reach if you want to engage in other ways. Don't go to those meetings. You need to make sure that, or I don't feel it's for them, that there's some vehicle to incentivize some of the other people to use their time to engage in outside of that meeting. So I just say to people, be the change that you seek. We all have power and we all can exercise it, even though, as our fellow person said, it can be really overwhelming. In these spaces especially, it can be really uplifting. And I really want to say it's been an honour and a pleasure. I wish I could stick around for the debate. I really, really do. I want to swing it either way. I want to say, look at the evidence, look at the numbers, the arrest rate. Is it going down when you do more? Section 60, is it really needed? Could it be repealed? So thank you ever so much for having me. I really enjoyed myself and commemorating Stephen and sharing with you the little that I know, but the lots of enthusiasm that I have.
Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure having you. And I know, obviously, Andy will be saving his voice now for the debate. So I know he'll extend his thanks as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so we're now going to move on to the debate. So for the sake of the debate, if I could ask everybody to once again ensure that your cameras are off, except for myself, Andy, and Chief Superintendent Roy Smith, who's just, as if by magic, popped up on screen there. So thank you very much. So the way that the debate will happen, before I introduce everybody, is that a slide will go up shortly, which will tell you what the House believes. And then Andy and Roy will have 5 minutes to debate their point of view, and then the opposite person will come back with a comeback. They will have 5 minutes and they will be cut off dead at 5 minutes. They'll get muted so that the next person can speak. They will get 2 occasions and then they will get a minute to sum up their view. Obviously, this is going to raise a lot of thoughts and views from everyone. So as tempting as it is, please don't unmute and interrupt the debate, but please use the chat function to put your points of views in. And there will be an opportunity at the end for you to pose any questions direct to our debaters. So without further ado, I'm going to start by introducing Chief Superintendent Roy Smith from the Met. We are very grateful for his time today and being able to do this debate, and I'm certainly very interested to hear about what he has to say. So, slide just popping up there, so you'll be able to see who he is. So he is currently leading work for the Met around focused on improving trust, confidence and legitimacy amongst London's Black communities. He has an array of experience within many different sections within the police, and most recently was awarded a Royal Humane Society Bronze Medal for his actions at the 2017 London Bridge terrorist attack. And as I say, we are very, very honoured to have him come today to be able to join us. The other person who you may know from already appearing on screen today is Inspector Andy George. Andy George is our president of the National Black Police Association. He joined the police in 1999 and has had experience in armed response, as it says there. He is currently an inspector, his last role being inspector of CID, and has taken over the mantle of the president of the National Black Police Association. And again, we're really honoured to have him come and join us, considering he's currently on paternity leave. So the House believes, for the sake of the debate, the House believes that stop and search is on the rise due to racial profiling. Okay, so if both speakers are ready, I'm going to offer the opportunity to Roy to begin. We're just going to get the slide down if you give us 2 minutes here. Okay, so Roy, if you let me know when you're ready, I will start your timer.
Thank you. So just before I start, I should probably just clarify. Obviously, I'm a senior officer within the Met Police, but the view that you're going to get from me today is a personal view based on some of the experience and learning that I've had, certainly over the last 12 months. It's not necessarily a corporate Met Police view, and I just need to make that point clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So when you're ready, just please feel free to start with your 5 minutes, and I'll let you know, or I'll mute you if it's mid-sentence.
I feel like I'm on countdown. Well, I'm very happy to start now. So I think the first point that I would make is that no senior officer or chief constable would knowingly or willingly endorse a policy which allows racial profiling. That would be an unlawful act. So that's my starting position, is that no senior officer would allow racial profiling to be something that is happening as a matter of policy. That is unlawful. The second point I would make from that is, do I think that some individual officers may racially profile? Absolutely. I couldn't sit here and say that I didn't believe that to be the case, because we are the police, we reflect society, and we know that some officers do things that they shouldn't. When officers do that, they should be held to account by the organisation, and we should all, I think, condemn that sort of behaviour when we see it. I would contest that stop and search is simply on the rise due to racial profiling. I think if we look at the recent increases, we can see that as violence has increased, so has stop and search. The question that I would sort of suggest to the House might be a better question to ask is, why is violence rising? And do we think that stop and search should remain one of our primary tactics in combating violence? I can speak for the Met, where the Commissioner has made it absolutely clear that reducing violence is our priority. And it seems to me that stop and search is one of the most important tools that we have in our armoury. But I question whether it's necessarily the most effective. And in some of the pre-read I was doing prior to today, some of you will have seen recommendation 5 from the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry report, which was that the government should review the effectiveness of stop and search procedures as a crime reduction strategy. Now, it may surprise some of you to hear this from a serving Met Cop, but I'm not sure that stop and search is the panacea to violence. I think it can be an effective tool. I absolutely think it has a place in policing, but my view is that I think we might be overusing it. I think stop and search is best used as a precise tactic, used in defined and tight geographical areas with strong intelligence. And one of the issues that we as policing face, particularly with London's black communities, and I think black communities across the country, is a lack of trust and confidence in policing has led, in my view, to a substantial decline in the quality of community-based intelligence. And an easy response for policing is just to do more stop and search. It's a simple tactic, it's easy to understand, and of course, it can deliver results. But results at what cost? What is the cost in terms of the reputation, the trust, and the legitimacy in policing if we use stop and search imperfectly or imprecisely? And I am yet to be convinced that there is a compelling evidence case that says stop and search as a long-term tactic and strategy for reducing violence is effective. That's a question I think we as policing and senior leaders should be asking more boldly. The second sort of observation I would make is in none of the meetings that I go to with communities has anyone ever said, from even the most vociferous community organisations, that we should stop doing stop and search. I've never heard that argument. What I've heard is people wanting us to do it fairly, precisely, and in intelligence-led fashion. And as police officers, particularly as senior police officers, we've got to stop dividing communities. And it seems to me that occasionally we say you're either for stop and search or you're against it. And it's not as binary as that. Most people absolutely see the need for us to have the power, but want it used better. And then the next point I wanted to move on to is, rather than necessarily sort of just drawing comparisons with stop and search and racial profiling, surely there are questions which we as human beings, take aside the fact that we all happen to be police officers, we as human beings should be asking, why are black people disproportionately represented in groups that experience poverty, lack of opportunity, systemic failures to provide equitable and fair access to service, not just public service? So this question goes far beyond policing, in my view, and we spend significant amount of time talking about disproportionality in the use of police powers. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that we should shy away from that responsibility. But at some point we need to move this debate, further downstream to say what is causing this in the first place. And certainly the journey that I've been on over the last 6 to 12 months, I wouldn't underestimate the impact of what I would phrase perspective blindness. There are a lot of cops that I believe are good, honest, hard-working officers that simply do not see the perspective or the impact of stop and search overused or delivered in a poor and insensitive way. And
I'm going to stop you there, Roy. Okay, so we're going to move over to Andy. If you want to start your 5 minutes now, please.
Yeah, no worries. Good afternoon, Roy. Thanks for taking up the debate. As I said, John Apter was meant to be here but pulled out at the last minute. So I'll take up the first point around your racial profiling and around the point you made around individual officers. For me, it's not about individual officers. It's about the systems and processes that we have had in place. The first part of that is around the legacy of stop and search and how that was used in the black or against the black community back in the 70s and 80s, because that intergenerational trauma is felt by those members of the community that are still being stopped. That's the first point I want to make. I don't think police officers are fully equipped to understand that trauma in its first instance. And I think when we look at the rise in stop and search in general, again, between 2019 to 2020, there was a 53% increase in stop searches where reasonable suspicion was to be used. Within that, there was also a 28% increase in homicides in England and Wales. Again, stop search increased. Was it stop search increase in that kind of there was a response to violence? I don't think policing moves that quickly. I think that there's a definite disconnect between the police and communities, and stop and search is being used as a blunt tool to try and deal with violence, or at least that's the excuse that's done. When we look at the data, and again, data is only one part of it. Data, you are 9 times more likely to be stop searched in England and Wales if you're black. 18 times more likely under Section 60, which again is quite a draconian power, and I'll come to that later on. From black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds across the board, you're 4 times more likely to be stopped. And again, as you said, around the efficacy of that, you look at the efficacy, 1 in 5 of those stops actually lead to a positive find. 4 out of 5 of those stops, because of the style and tone and how we're actually conducting stop search at this minute in time, is actually pushing the community further and further away from us. Again, 1 in 25 of those actually leads to a fine under Section 60, which again shows that it isn't increased. And again, I want to move back towards that trust and confidence piece, which we all agree is something that policing needs to do to be effective. So you look at that, in 2014-15, we had 15.5% of those that were involved in violence charged. So 15.5% of incidents, somebody was charged. In 2019 to 27% were charged. And again, for me, that is a big gap, probably connected to our reduction in neighbourhood policing and those informal contacts with community, so that officers can see the best of the community rather than just looking at them as a one entire whole based on their negative perceptions in the media and negative perceptions that they're getting when they're going into these areas and enforcing people. And again, I link that back to the legacy. Those officers, if we chat about the Met, those officers that probably work in London but live outside of London in less diverse areas, who don't have the same social circle as the people in the demography of the communities that they police, they get a lot of their information from the media. They also get a lot of their information through the enforcement action that they've got. They don't understand the legacy of what has happened in those communities, and they don't understand the fact that communities see the uniform they're wearing as opposed to them as individuals, and what that uniform represents to themselves. So as I said, trust and confidence is really key. I think the fact that stop search in London itself is accounting for probably half of the stop searches in England and Wales, and probably skews a lot of the data. For me, that does push it across. It makes us less targeted because we've pushed the community so far away. Because, as you said, senior officers and some of their comments around racial profiling and some of the recent comments around continuing the use of disproportionate stop and search highlights the communities that they aren't valued, and puts them in really in a position where they don't see the police as a viable protector of their communities. So what we really need to do is build up those informal interactions with communities. And again, looking back at the profiling, which I should actually hit before the engagement piece, you go to Scotland, where knife crime was a pandemic as well as in London. They used a public health kind of approach that led to an 80% reduction in knife crime and a 60% reduction in homicide. So again, the majority and demography of Glasgow at that time was a majority.
8th July, it's the 8th, yeah.
So there were, I can just hear somebody not
we
on
gone
mute.
12.
So within Glasgow, within a majority white population, we were able to take that public health approach and look at it more than it was just something that black communities do or that white communities in Glasgow do.
Yeah.
We were able to see it more holistically, and we were able to put better interventions in place at a number of points to alleviate the root causes of crime,
2 weeks,
not just the symptoms. And again, those symptoms were kind of.
I think we should be all right by that. No, we're going for a week.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, Andy. That is the end of your 5 minutes. Can I ask who's just joined the meeting? DS Sohi, please, can you mute? You're interrupting the debate. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move over to Roy, if you'd like to come back in on your part there, please. If you want to hang fire so we can find who the person is that is not muting. Right, that should work now. Okay, if you want to go ahead with yours. Roy, if you want to unmute yourself, sorry.
Can you hear me now? Look at this technical failure. So first of all, I've got to contest the point about the legacy from the 70s and 80s where stop and search was used against black communities. I absolutely acknowledge some of the trauma that caused and the legacy that remains, but I would contest it. We are not stopping people who were stopped in the 70s and 80s. The primary group in London certainly are 18 to 24-year-olds. I think I also have to say that, police officers amongst the stop and search has undoubtedly, in the last 12 months and beyond, saved lives. So there is definitely a place for it. I think numbers and statistics are never going to win this debate, in my view. I can quote all sorts of statistics, and it doesn't change how people feel. I've also had the mothers and families of those who have been tragically killed on the streets of London, including someone like Lillian, the grandmother of a 2-year-old that was shot in the head, who look me in the eye and they say, we want you in our communities, and when it's appropriate, we want you to use stop and search. So I could tell you that, from January this year, we actually searched 15% more white people than black people for drugs, something we've not seen before. but those statistics don't resonate with communities. And I think 2 points that in a debate, it's probably not good to agree with the opposition necessarily, Andy, is it? But I absolutely agree that I think the reduction in neighbourhood policing and the loss of those informal policing encounters has contributed significantly to this problem. I absolutely agree with you on that point. We need to reinvest in community policing. To the other point, I think you mentioned around Section 60 powers and the disproportionality there. I will give another controversial view. This is my personal view, not the organisational one. Section 60 is a highly intrusive power. The circumstances in which Section 60 is applicable and appropriate should be very, very narrow. And for any of us who've been on the streets and out policing in communities, I would assert that in the majority of circumstances where we are trying to reduce violence and take weapons off the street, sufficient intelligence should exist and grounds under Section 1 of PACE for the vast majority of those scenarios. So we've got to ask ourselves the question, using a Section 60 power, which some are likened to the use of sus law, is it proportionate? Do we have public trust and confidence to do it in that way? So I'm not suggesting that we abolish Section 60, but I am suggesting it should be used in a very controlled manner, very tightly and in response to specific intelligence. And then my final point is, of course, I recognise that young black men are disproportionately impacted by stop and search. But for as long as they are disproportionately represented amongst both the victims of serious crime, including homicide, and the suspect's demographic, then we are always going to be targeting that power in the areas that we think it will make the most impact and potentially save the most lives. So I'll close my point by saying that even if we reduce stop and search significantly, we target it much more precisely with really good quality intelligence. I suggest that right now, until we address some of those other systemic and societal issues, we still see disproportionality, because it is young black men that are primarily affected by violence, and they are the people that we are perhaps sometimes clumsily and without articulating it well, trying to protect the most.
Okay, Andy, do you want to come back in at this point, please?
Yep, no, I will indeed. And again, Roy, I do take some of your points on board. And again, the data is only one part of the debate. I placed in Northern Ireland, grew up in an area where I lost my best friend's father, was shot dead through a window. Another one was blown up on a roadside bomb. We used to use stop and search all the time. We had static stacks checkpoints around every town going into Northern Ireland. We had twice as many police, 13,500 police when I first joined policing in 1999, 6,500, close to 7,000 now. We were also backed up by 7,000 military personnel who used to fly us everywhere. They used to bring us in. There was wide-scale public disorder because we were not seen as legitimate and we were not listening to all communities in Northern Ireland. Despite that enforcement route, and the enforcement route probably alone at that stage, we still had bombs and bullets getting through. We still lost large members of the community and the policing family as well to violence. And again, that's the bit that probably the piece that I really am so passionate about stop and search for. I do agree with its use. It's disproportionate use, which is wrong, which pushes communities further away. And again, policing thrives on intelligence from the community. We cannot do our job as a detective inspector in Belfast, dealing with everything from attempted murder down to hijackings to the arson with intent and pipe bombs that were used to intimidate people and to try to take people's lives. I relied on intelligence coming through from the community, telling us who did it, or at least leading us on the right track, whether that's somebody when we're doing a door-to-door stop, when we're doing whatever else, through intelligence itself. We rely on the community telling us where we are. That's what's making us not targeted. When we do not become legitimate in certain communities, and whenever we use the debate and stop listening to communities really and entrench our own position, that is where the communities push further and further away. We cannot allow that. The organised crime groups actually thrive in that environment. The organised crime groups in Belfast, just like in London, do not want police to be legitimate in the community, do not want police to be in and out of the community, so they want us to have that vacuum so that they can then come in as the protectors of the community to help them, which only leads them and coerces them into violence, into stashing drugs for certain organised crime groups. You look at the protection and around violence, we have paramilitary style attacks where young people involved in drugs that aren't maybe paying enough protection money to paramilitaries and others, they are shot in the leg. So they are, as a punishment, are beaten with baseball bats. We do not use Section 60 or its equivalent in relation to that, because we know that those that have actually committed that crime are probably lying underground pretty close to where the actual assault happened. And what we do is we actually go in and try to work with the community. We do not stop search everybody, because we know that likelihood of finding the offender is actually really limited. And what we need to do is work with the community as opposed to enforcing that community alone and targeting the rest of that community or the rest of those people living in that estate based on the actions of a few that are involved in organised crime. What that does then is it does allow us to actually have some impact in relation to actually finding those that are causing most harm. But what we want to do is move to a prevent model. For me, engagement, like we said, is crime prevention. That use of and the draconian use of some powers is just completely not going to get to the root causes. It's like whack-a-mole. We're going to constantly deal with the symptom and not the underlying causes. Until we get into the underlying causes and actually alleviate those and have officers interacting with communities and seeing beyond those that do it, because style and tone's important. And arraigned profiling, you look at the Bianca Williams stop and the Dawn Butler stop, which we had quite a few interactions over. It wasn't just about the fact that Bianca Williams was stopped. It was the style and tone in which she was stopped. It was the fact that officers drew their batons, that officers come up and almost dragged her out of the vehicle and her partner. That showed that the mindset those officers had was that the people in that vehicle were violent. Not a family, not somebody just going about their daily business, but they were violent, and there was a real danger to officers. And that danger is there. The fact that handcuffing is routinely used at times to deal with to deal with people that are being stopped searched, that creates a negative interaction, which only compounds things. And again, in Northern Ireland, where I carry a gun and drive an armoured police vehicle, we do not routinely handcuff people during stop and search, because I know that's going to lead to a negative interaction. I do it based on the individual threat and risk assessment that I see at that moment in time, rather than a more holistic look at how dangerous communities are based on their ethnicity, race, or.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Roy, do you want to come back?
Yeah, so obviously I can't talk about the Bianca Williams case, as we know that's subject to an ongoing investigation. What I can agree on is the style and tone is important, and often we don't get that right. Sometimes I think that's through a lack of skill and experience of particularly newer officers who we've got to support and help to get there. A couple of observations I would make is whether you think that there is, well, it's a fact that there's disproportionality. But stop and search is saving lives. In 2021, March 2021, so March this year, 460 weapons off the streets of London through stop and search. So absolutely, it's delivering results. But even if we address all the points that you make, Andy, and I agree with many of them, even if we were almost perfect at stop and search and we were targeting it exactly, it would still be disproportionate, because young black men primarily are massively overrepresented in a group that become victims and are suspects of violent crime. So for as long as the debate is focused simply on stop and search and not preventing those young men primarily from becoming either a victim or suspect or engaged in violence, through addressing issues of poverty, social equality, education, then this wheel will keep spinning. The debate has to move beyond stop and search. What I would also say is I think we are overusing handcuffs. I've led work on our review. I think the Commissioner rightly commissioned a review into it. And we are in some cases overusing handcuffs. I think that I would accept. What equally I would say is I absolutely see from a frontline officer's perspective that when they go out on the streets and we see officers seriously assaulted or injured, they're trying to protect themselves and keep people safe. And we're in this sort of negative spiral at the moment that every time, and you know, we're talking about young black men here primarily, every time you have a police encounter with a young black man, and the young black man gets, for reasons that I actually understand in the majority of the time, I'll certainly say that, but when the young black person gets agitated and aggressive and in some cases violent, even if they've not committed a substantial offence, the police response to that is to control it using force and handcuffs. And we end up in this constant sort of cycle of escalating tension and aggression. That benefits nobody. Now, wherever there is a power imbalance, the onus is always on the person with power to do more. So we as police officers absolutely have to take responsibility for de-escalating and making sure that we are not using too much force or force that is inappropriate. But there is some community responsibility here too. And, you know, my plea for all of us, particularly for black police officers who have far more legitimacy amongst black communities than I do, we've got to get the message to communities as well that don't help reinforce those negative stereotypes, because that simply damages the very points that you are trying to make, and in many cases I agree with.
Okay, Andy, if you want to come in, this will be your last opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. As I said, it's definitely some of the points we can definitely agree on, and we have done on Twitter a few times. But again, it's about equipping officers to understand, not just physically that they have all of the tools that they need to do their job effectively, but also psychologically that they understand communities, that they understand the frustration that exists within the community, particularly at this minute in time with COVID, with austerity, with a number of other things which have pushed communities further and further away, and which have actually probably highlighted and exacerbated the inequality that we find in society. For me, police officers need to understand that, but they also need to understand the cultural difference in each community. And again, this is the whole point, and this is the profiling piece, is they do not understand that certain communities are actually louder and culturally different. They are or appear more aggressive in the way they interact with people. So this is the whole point around the fact that race actually does come into it. You said about the stats around young black males being victims more. I believe they're just over twice as likely to be the victim of knife crime in London, I think is the right stat, which shows that about 13% of the population of London is from a black background at the last census, and I think they're about 28% or 30, something like that, in and around the fact that they're going to be victims. Again, a lot of offenders are actually white whenever it comes to knife crime in London as well. But the message that we get isn't that knife crime is a problem across London. What we get is that knife crime is a problem in the black community. And that's a narrative not pushed out by police, but pushed out by the media and pushed out by a number of people that want to, I suppose, delegitimize the push for racial equality. So for me, it's about making sure that communities understand that what police are trying to do. And again, those messages that come from the top at times, that come from policing, denies the community experience, which only adds to the frustration and widens that gap that police and community have. So for me, it's making sure that we have the right training around de-escalation, around communities being understood better, and again, those interactions also being created, but as well as that, working with partners to try and get to the root causes, because for me, it is a root cause to crime and to serious crime in general. And again, we look at the stats around serious violence. Again, only 16% of those stops are actually done for weapons. I know that drugs is the main driver or the main reason for stop searches, and there is a link to violence and organised crime. But again, it's often Class B drugs which are actually being taken off the street, and not for possession with intent. It's generally low-level possession as well, which shows that we're not actually targeting the right people. So for me, get in with the communities, get that information, allow us to be more targeted in our approach, allow us to actually use stop and search in a proportionate manner, and in a manner which also supplements a number of other initiatives, rather than just being that blunt tool that we all know is used as a measuring stick for people's performance a lot of the time, which actually enhances that bad behaviour and keeps pushing it on. So that's just where I would like to finish.
Okay, thank you very much. So you both, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you just 30 seconds, a minute to just sum up your final point, and then I'm going to go to some questions. We've had a lot of questions, as you can imagine, and I will give you both the opportunity to answer those. So starting with Roy, just is there anything you want to summarise before we move to questions?
So just four quick ones, I think, in relation to Andy, your last points. There's no performance indicators for stop and search. I think performance indicators per se are perverse and unhelpful. I agree, again, I'm the worst person to be debating with, really, because I agree with you that cultural difference and understanding cultural difference is key. And, you know, I live in London. I'm a Londoner. I've been a victim of crime in London, and I police London. And if you have people that travel in from outside of London that are well educated, that are from affluent backgrounds, I'm not saying that any of those things are bad things, but I would definitely agree they don't understand London in quite the same way. And that's why I'm really pleased that the Met are taking steps to address that with the reintroduction of the residency criteria. And then just the final point on drugs, because I do think this is worth noting. Lots of people say to me, well, you know, you stop a group of young black lads for smoking cannabis, but why aren't you in the city stopping loads of white blokes doing cocaine? And the answer to that, and the reason why the majority of our searches for drugs are for Class B and for cannabis, is because that is what we are called about more frequently. often by members of the black community. So if we look at some of the data that we have, people ring us up and say there's 4 lads smoking cannabis in my stairway, and because of the smell, it's really antisocial. We don't get calls saying there's 2, white blokes in a toilet cubicle in a bar sniffing cocaine. We don't get those calls. So I think we've also just got to understand that some of the disproportionality, particularly in searching for drugs, is driven by the people calling us and the concern caused by specific issues, if that makes sense. And to the point I'm seeing in the chat bar, absolutely, and I'm still learning, I have to say. I think there's 3 things I'll say very quickly in closing. Cultural difference is key, and don't underestimate the lack of knowledge and awareness. So the point about raised voice, we've all got to go on a journey to better understand people. Secondly, I can only profess to have sort of started seeing this genuinely from a different perspective in the last 6 to 12 months. A brand new cop on the street does not understand the decades and decades of legacy, of pain, of being told that we're going to improve and seeing nothing change, of the systemic failures to provide equality of opportunity. When you put all of that together, I absolutely understand why sometimes interactions with police officers start off from a position of, we don't trust you, and this isn't going to go well from the get-go. So it's taken me 6 to 12 months of intense work in this space to even begin to understand that. So we have to recognise that many of our colleagues are good people who just yet haven't been on that journey. And the responsibility that all of us have, but particularly to those of you that are black colleagues, the responsibility that we have is to make sure that we don't scare the life out of them. So at least they're prepared to have the debate, to go on the journey, and to feel that they can admit that they were previously wrong and they have developed. That would be my parting plea, that we've got a responsibility to make sure we don't make the debate simply about them and us, because that serves nobody well.
Okay, thank you very much. Andy, we're going to move to questions. Do you want to sum anything up, or are you happy to do that in your questions?
No, I'm happy enough.
Okay, so at this stage, I'm quite happy for people to turn their cameras on. I will go through the questions to begin with, if you want to ask them yourself. John, do you want to come on and ask a question you've asked around the tactics the Met are employing in particular?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Roy. You mentioned you talked about tactics that the Met are using. What tactics are you using to ensure that racial profiling is not being utilised within the Met?
So difficult one to say what tactics are we using. I think what I can say is that we've got significantly enhanced scrutiny of the use of stop and search. So our most recent figures, 97% of stop and search encounters were captured on body-worn video. And the biggest thing that we're doing is opening ourselves up to be more transparent and accountable than ever before. So we're currently rolling out new, what we're calling policing encounter scrutiny panels across London, where we're inviting communities in to independently observe not just stop and search, but any use of force by police officers, including the body-worn video, including the grounds, including the intelligence, to provide us with that sort of independent check and balance. So, we are more accountable than ever before. The level of scrutiny is higher than it has ever been. So, there are a couple of things that I would say immediately that we're doing now that we haven't done previously to help identify if there are issues and address them.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Amy, you have made more of an observation. Do you want to talk about that? You may be on mute. You might have to unmute yourself. Oh, no mic. Okay. If we move on to, I think it's Pushpa, do you have something in there about, I can't see them all now, sorry, diverse communities? Did you want to come on and pose a question or talk about that? Don't forget to unmute yourself. No, okay. So we've got a question about the percentage of crime committed in the Met from Adam. Adam, do you want to come on with that?
Hello, sir. Yeah, my question is basically, obviously, we're aware that there's a disproportionality between stop and search and race in the Met and probably throughout the country. But is there a link between criminality and race when it comes to the Met? And is that affecting stop and search? Or do you think stop and search is increasing criminalisation within our BIM communities?
So I don't have the data to be able to answer that question, and this isn't a sort of a swerve. I don't have the data to be able to answer that question entirely. What I could say is that I am open-minded to the fact that if you are, whether through consciously or unconsciously or for any other reason, if you are focused on a particular group of people, whether that's defined by race, by culture, by age or demographic, if you are looking at them, you are more likely to find something. And the more times you find something to confirm that, then the more you look. And so the cycle goes round. So I think we certainly, and we don't have any evidence on this because it's for reasons which are obvious, very difficult to control. I think we've got to constantly check and balance ourselves to say, are we simply finding more because we are looking? And if this is the case, how do we become conscious of that? And a very not quite related to your kind of example, but I'll give you a very, very honest answer from me on this. And some people may have strong views. I absolutely accept, in my mind, my threat assessment when I'm dealing with a young black man on the streets of London is higher than it is for a young white male. The reason for that is because most of the recent encounters I've had where I've been assaulted or seen a level of violence or aggression used has involved young black men. You've got to be quite brave to admit that, and a lot of cops don't want to admit that for fear of being labelled racist. If you cannot accept that your assessment is different, how on earth can you take steps to address it, to understand it, to control it, and to mitigate it? And that is one of the things that I think we've got to start helping colleagues do. We've got to accept if we're seeing people differently or in a different way, challenge our own bias, look at the reasons that it's happening, and then try and stop it and address it. But the starting point is accepting that some of us may, even with the best of intentions, be doing things in a way that is unintended.
Okay, thank you very much. So just so we can keep this on track, obviously we've had a lot of conversation. I'm going to go to Andy just for the final words around this, but one of the points that has been made by Judy and a few others is just around how it can be seen aggressive, stereotyping on certain communities in the way that they communicate. So I just wonder if you could pick up on that, on your point, so we can close the debate.
No, definitely. I mean, it has been discussed during the debate that different cultures express themselves in different ways, and we need to understand that in general. We need to understand the psychological processes that police officers go through in general. It's quite heartening to hear Roy say that in the last 6 to 12 months he has been on that journey, and I applaud you for kind of that going. We met on Twitter a few times and did have a few back-to-backs. It's really good to see that you have opened your eyes to some of the issues that do exist, because we need senior leaders in the Metropolitan Police and other areas to actually see what we have experienced and what we know is happening on the ground and for communities. For me, the NBPA, and I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the Met BPA, but I am sure that they are passionate, just like the NBPA, about getting into communities and about closing that gap between the communities and the police. We are police officers, police staff members. We're part of the policing family. We're often seen as being outside of it, but we are there wanting to make things better for communities and also for police officers. Me as the president, I want to see officers better equipped to make better decisions and better risk assessments and be safer on the streets of London and on the streets of any city in the whole of the UK. For me, there is an officer safety bit in not listening to the community as well, because we have seen protests happen in Northern Ireland. You've seen in the last couple of weeks, you see the sustained violence that we have and the increased community impact that we must adhere to. And some of the words that I have heard from some senior leaders in the Met have been different to what I would hear in the PSNI. And again, that's probably just because the consequences in Northern Ireland are much more. We will have officers attacked, shot and potentially bombed, and large-scale disorders. So for me, the principle is still the same. It's understand the communities, listen to them, and then kind of try to work with them to get all of this done. So I applaud you for taking the time out to come and speak to us as well. I know I didn't want it to be you versus everybody in here and stuff, or you against me. We do agree on quite a few things, which has been apparent during the debate. And I really want to thank you for coming today. So thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, and thank you very much. It is good from a lot of people are mentioning accountability, leadership, all those kind of things. So thank you very much for that. And please feel free to stay for the rest of the session, although there's not that much longer to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who's just going to give us some reflections around her views on where we are now, where we've been, and probably a couple of things on Stop and Search. Obviously, we could listen to Janet absolutely all day. I know I could. And I think it is, in some respects, it's a shame that we only have this time with her. But for those who don't know Janet, why, I would say, first of all, but Janet is Janet Hill's MBE, is the chairperson of the Met Black Police Association and a serving police officer with 29 years. And the other day sent me a text message to say a number of minutes left because she's that excited. She has held a number of posts within the Met BPA herself, including First Contact Support Coordinator and General Secretary, and became the first female chairperson of the association in 2013. Janet joined the Met in 1991 and was the president herself of the National Black Police Association between 2015 and 2017. She now holds a reserved seat with us on the cabinet, and we are very grateful to have her and her expertise. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Janet.
Thank you. So hopefully my mic is switched off and that everyone can hear me. So I've been given a 10-minute window, which for me, anyone that knows me, I'd probably talk for longer than that if I really want to. So I haven't done a preparation of any slides or even a conversation really, but it was really just to try and summarize in that time my own reflections, having joined, as Zoe said, in 1991. So that was 2 years prior to obviously the murder of Stephen Lawrence. But when I came into policing, we were busy dealing with what was the Scarman report. So in terms of the legislative change that had happened, we'd gone from what was the policing regs or the policing act into this new era of PACE, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, which gave us the codes of conduct and obviously section 1 of Stop and Search, which you know, Roy and Andy have been debating, which was, I have to say, a really good debate, guys. So in terms of that, part of the history is when I arrived at Brixton, so in 1991, I was posted to Brixton after doing my 20 weeks at Hendon. I lived 8 miles away. I lived in a place called Croydon. And for me, I had no links with Brixton. I was about 13 when the first riot happened in Brixton, and then that's the 81 riot, and then they had one in 85 when officers went into Cherry Gross's home to look for her son to arrest him, and obviously ended up shooting her, and there was a riot after that. So in terms of my own upbringing, the only thing I'd heard about Brixton was all negative to a degree in terms of black people rioting and causing all of this damage and so on and so forth. So when I arrived in 1991, it almost felt like everyone thought that I was from Brixton, if that makes sense. So everyone thought that I knew the sort of race relation issues between policing and communities. And I didn't. I was as naive as they come. And most of my learning, in fact, all of my learning, because I've been in policing now for more than half of my life, has come through just my own engagements. So importantly, both speakers who were talking earlier were talking about things that need to be done to improve things. And for me, I think education is a real key aspect. I now, when I travel, don't go anywhere unless I've got my phone to hand and I'm Googling where it is I'm going. So there's this understanding of where it is I've been, what I can do in that area, a little bit of history about what's happened there over the time, so that actually I can get a better experience of visiting those areas. But in terms of policing, we don't do that. We have potentially people outside of London policing London who don't have an understanding of the communities, have not got a demographic of friends that sort of represents people of difference. So actually they're coming in with a fixed lens around what they expect to see. And again, that was similar to my experience when I turned up at Brixton in 1991. But yeah, we were busy dealing with all of the recommendations from the Scarman report, which was embedding the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. And then subsequently, 93 happened. And to be fair, do you know what? I'm going to be honest with you and say that I didn't know. So even I'd been in for 2 years then, on the ground floor, you know, that was an incident that happened on another borough in terms of where I was at Brixton. And it was a murder investigation that was going on where actually, you know, that didn't impact on me as a PC on my team. When the impact really came was when the Macpherson report came out in 99, because then it felt like, oh my gosh, police have been called racist, and actually, you know, we're not racist. And that was the biggest impact for me in understanding what had gone on, was the amount of times my white colleagues were asking me, oh, so do you think we're racist then? Do you think we're racist? And I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. But then I came to realize why they were asking that. And I think, as I said, education for me is the key thing, because even in today's society, we still have people that think that institutional or systemic racism is about the individual. And we know differently to understand that actually it's about processes, it's about systems that have been in place way before we were here and around, which have established themselves within organisations, which is, for me, part of the change that we need to see. So, you know, police staff have been mentioned, and again, they are so key in terms of policing legitimacy. I know people talk about having, you know, a number of police officers on the streets. The numbers are not great at the moment. We've made very little progress in bridging the gap that's been created. And again, part of that is around the fact that we've not been educated. We've not had the conversations with our communities. We are not necessarily listening to our communities. And therefore, if you don't understand the problem, you're not going to be able to solve it. So in terms of that, there's a lot that needs to be done in education. But in terms of our legitimacy and where our police staff, again, have a key role, is that they can have an experience within policing that actually goes away and advocates for us. So, you know, they may have family and friends, but their experience in policing is also just as important as a police officer's experience. And again, something that I feel should be utilised more, and in particular when we talk around the policy and practices, because HR units are again key to some of those changes happening, you know, and again, it's about the lens at which people use to apply certain things, where actually without any thought, because it's a process and it's HR and we've always done it that way, if there was a little bit more conversation, a bit more understanding, then potentially we could arrive at the point where we are solving the problem. And that's, again, key for why the NBPA exists, and particularly for the BPA, for why we exist. But part of our legacy and our history is that, you know, at the time of the Macpherson inquiry, officers and staff went and gave evidence at that inquiry. And, you know, if you read some of the transcripts, it was almost like they were saying it was the first time that they had had a kind of truth to power sort of explanation about what was going on. You know, these officers and staff who were given evidence were saying something different to what was the set piece in terms of their experience and their lived experience. And as I said, you know, we've done over the years a lot of work to still keep going into our communities, especially our young people, and ensuring that there is this conversation, there is this listening, And again, we will take that and advocate from within in trying to address some of the issues that our communities are going. But on reflection, for me, there is still so much more to do. As I said, I'm at my 30-year marker, and I've got members of the BPA who have been past chairs who have done their 30 years. So we are talking in terms of our own existence in policing, from say 1990, when the first lot of Black and Asian officers went to Bristol. We're talking 30 odd years where, little change has happened. We've had review after review. We've had conversation after conversation. It's almost like we know what the issues are. We know what the problem is, but there's this stubbornness to really action it and make it embedded and get it embedded into policing. So for me, it's like we've done as much as we can do, but what more is there to do? Do you know what I mean? It feels like, we can't stop this. We have to be consistent. We know what's happened in the past. We know where we got to. We've dealt with those things primarily rather well, but ultimately it has to be consistent and it has to be for the future. And we have to look forward in terms of society, where it is now and what the expectations will be for the future. So there is a bit of work for us to do, and I wish you all the best of luck in doing it.
Thank you, Janet, and always amazing to hear you speak. And as I say, we could probably just do an event, just the Janet event. Maybe we will do that, Andy. We'll put that on the table as a discussion, a Janet event. So before I give Andy the last word to close the event today, we want to show you a video which has come from the Stephen Lawrence Foundation. It is a very, very good video. If you haven't seen it, then you need to, this is why we wanted to put it on. So we're going to go to the video. It's only a short video, so please watch, and then Andy will close the event. So Neha, if you want to run the video, please.
I will never forget Stephen Lawrence, a talented student and loving son, adored by his parents, Neville and Doreen, tragically taken from them at the age of 18. My world changed on the 22nd of April 1993. News headlines read "Murdered by white youths at a bus stop, innocently." That was gut-wrenching and stuck on my mind. Chosen randomly, wrong place, wrong time. His black face could easily have been mine. It was my George Floyd moment back then, you see, and it still makes no sense to me. For an unforgiving family trial, where even Nelson Mandela came to raise the profile and walk the long walk with the Lawrence family, shaming the Met and the Race Relation Act's inadequacies. The fact that the act is needed at all is a failure of a Britain that gave that famous call to a Windrush generation to come lend a hand
to help rebuild this motherland.
You tell me, how should I react when most choose to ignore the Race Relations Act that states socially, economically, educationally and more?
To discriminate on the grounds of race
is simply against the law. We know the law. It's not some apparition in black people's heads or chips on shoulders of race issues long dead. We see those not willing to admit to uncomfortable pasts, not knowing for us that these histories last. This is why it took 18 long years and a Macpherson report through blood, sweat and tears that saw the abolition of the double jeopardy law. 2 out of the 5 retried is something Britain never experienced before. A black family actually changing the law to bring about convictions that said, in 2012, 2 will serve life for killing Stephen dead. I wish I could say it's done and dusted and we're happy with pride, but but it isn't. I can't lie. When black people like Stephen continue to die. None of this I've said is done to create any controversy.
It's simply explaining what brought us here to support
Stephen's legacy. In this moment of global unrest, where people of all ethnicities are voicing their protest, alongside black people, to say we will no longer ignore the racism we all deplore. And that's why we will honor Stephen with humility and embrace all the differences and diversity of our human race, in celebration of all Britain can be,
in our families, our lives,
and our communities. We will make the changes that we need to see, raising our voices in all we do. We will educate everyone
that he is part of all of us too.
And we will never forget Stephen Lawrence.
Stephen Lawrence Day is coming 22nd of April 2021. To find out how you can get involved, register at stephenlawrenceday.org and help us create a legacy of change.
No, that's great, Nihat. Thanks for that video. As I said, just before we close, I just wanted to say thank everybody, obviously, for coming today. This is probably one of the last events that Janet will actually be doing, as she is leaving us and retiring in August. So we will definitely look at having to commemorate that in some way. But in relation to Stephen Lawrence Day, as we said, it's quite poignant. It's much needed to come together to remember his legacy. The trauma that the family went through, not only in losing a son, and again, a lot of the time that is what's lost in all of this. Stephen Lawrence was a person. He isn't just, the legacy isn't just around everything that he's achieved from that. The legacy is also the fact that there's a family that have to deal with having lost a loved one. The strength that Doreen and Neville, Stuart and the rest of the Lawrence family have had to kind of summon and really push on it shows that there is issues that need addressing. And again, his legacy is still alive in 2021. The need for that push for racial equality in the UK and in policing in particular is still there. And we need to educate everybody around what happened to Stephen Lawrence and the family and to make sure that it doesn't happen again. The death of George Floyd, the conviction of Derek Chauvin, all of that kind of stuff that's happening now shows that we have still a lot of work to do. But from an NBPA perspective, we'll continue to engage with everybody and try to get that message across that we want things to be better for all, not just for ourselves, and we will continue to push for that equality. So thanks for joining us today. Hopefully you have learned something from it, and hopefully we'll be in touch and be engaging with a lot of you in the future. So take care, all the best.